Hey. So, hi, I'm Martha, 29, and I work remotely as a UX designer, which basically means I can live anywhere and set my own schedule. Sounds dreamy? Right. Well, it comes with its own weird side effects, especially when it comes to family drama. My life has been a mix of freedom and being the go to person for every crisis at home. But, okay, before we dive into the story, tell me, where are you watching from and what time is it there? It's always wild to see how far these stories travel. Christmas in my family? Oh, it wasn't about joy, really. Not the way you see in movies. Anyway, it was more like a production, a high stakes play where everyone had a role. And I was always backstage. My sister Victoria, she was the star. Bright, polished, effortlessly perfect. And me, well, I was the invisible crew making sure everything around her sparkled. From the moment I was old enough to hold a sponge, I was on call for family obligations that somehow always landed on my shoulders. I mean, I don't even remember when it started. It feels like I was born with an apron in one hand and a to-do list in the other. While Victoria was busy with ballet, piano, and a bunch of other extracurriculars that would look amazing on some social resume, I was learning things that, in hindsight, were sort of absurd. Setting a table for 12 like it was a military operation. Ironing dad's shirts until the creases were so sharp you could cut yourself on them. Baking mom's favorite lemon drizzle cake without letting the top crack. You know, skills no one ever taught in school, but somehow I needed to master to survive the holidays at home. And there was always that little phrase from my mom, Susan. She'd smile tight-lipped, like she was performing her own kind of subtle magic, and say, Victoria has her talents, and you have yours. Martha. Oh yeah, right, that was code. Victoria was destined for the spotlight, and I was destined for the scullery. It wasn't a suggestion, it was a rule carved into the family dynamic so early that I didn't even question it. Not at first. Anyway, as the years went on, the roles just became clearer, sharper. Victoria's life was this curated gallery of achievements and picturesque moments. She went from excelling in school to building a career as a lifestyle blogger. Her job, staging brunches, writing captions about mindfulness, while lounging on some resort vacation and generally making her life look like a never-ending Instagram highlight reel. I mean, you couldn't help but admire it on the surface. Meanwhile, my life, quiet, practical, full of effort that rarely, if ever, earned recognition. I excelled academically, sure, but without fanfare. I built a tech career from the ground up, something my parents, especially dad, Ewan never really got. To them, it was like I was just playing on a computer. A UX designer building the architecture for apps people used every day. Not impressive. Not worthy of their applause. Meanwhile, Victoria's 1,000 likes on a handbag photo. Success. Victoria announcing her engagement to some guy from a well-known family success. Me just quietly ticking boxes, making things happen behind the scenes. Completely invisible. And Christmas. Oh. Christmas was the peak of it all. Hosted at my parents' house? Sure, but it was never really about celebrating together. It was Victoria's stage. Her friends were the guests. Her favorite dishes were served. And her schedule dictated the entire flow of the holiday. I was the setup crew, the caterer, the cleaning staff all rolled into one. Calls from my mom would start early December, gentle reminders at first, then escalating into passive-aggressive demands. Martha, darling, I know you're busy with your computer thing, but I'll need you this weekend to help with deep cleaning before the party. And your father's silver, it needs polishing. You have such a patient hand. Patient hand. That was just another way of saying, we don't want to do it. So, every year, I would sigh, rearrange my schedule, and drive the 45 minutes to their suburban house to spend my weekends scrubbing, polishing, cooking meals that could be frozen and reheated, all the while telling myself it was just what daughters did, that it was easier to comply than to fight. But man, that was a comforting lie I fed myself. The truth, I was swallowing bitterness, slowly, every holiday season, and I hated that taste, even then. By the time we got into our teens, the contrast between us could not have been starker. Victoria's life was a seamless display of glamour and accomplishment. She glided through her milestones, handshakes and photos, parties and applause. Me, I was learning to be the silent enabler, the invisible backbone of her golden life. My successes getting into a good university, saving up for my first apartment, promotions at work, none of it seemed to matter in their eyes. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't worthy of celebration. It was just me being reliable, patient, and invisible. And yet, the expectations for Christmas just kept escalating. Each year, the chores became more complex. I was no longer just setting tables or baking cakes. I was navigating a minefield of perfectionist demands. My parents and Victoria expected everything to be flawless. The ornaments had to be aligned just so, every surface cleaned, every dish perfect. And if something went wrong, well, then I was at fault. Naturally, I'd be at the counter, rolling dough or arranging canapes, and my mom would walk in, sipping her coffee like she was in a movie, glancing over her shoulder with a light, airy laugh that somehow made me feel like all my effort didn't exist. "Don't screw this up, Martha," she'd say, as if I could or would, because somehow my compliance was never enough, yet expected to be absolute. And Dad, Ewan, was the silent enforcer. Rarely a word, just directives, lists, instructions like a manager, not a parent. Christmas Eve would come, and I was executing a perfectly choreographed event for Victoria's benefit, while feeling more invisible than ever. I remember standing in the kitchen, the smell of cinnamon and pine filling the air. My hands moving automatically over pies and trays, and just thinking, I've spent my whole life being the shadow to Victoria's spotlight. And yeah, there was pride too. I was competent, reliable, but man, the cost. The cost was everything I was giving up for someone else's glory. My time, my energy, my recognition, my voice, all of it had been siphoned off for years. And while Victoria shone brighter, I faded further into the background. Even my teenage birthdays were a lesson in disparity. When I turned 16, I wanted a modest used car to get to work. They hemmed and hawed over budgets. But a few years later, Victoria got a brand new convertible for her 19th birthday. My scholarship money, earned with blood, sweat, and late nights, funded her whims. Even my hard-earned independence was just fuel for her elevated life. Christmas, then, wasn't just a holiday. It was a yearly reminder of this imbalance. I was the invisible engine keeping the family machine running. My labor and presence expected, never appreciated. And I didn't fully realize the pattern until adulthood. The early years had been a fog of compliance, but looking back, it's like there was this constant current pulling me into service. teaching me to be invisible while Victoria took center stage. Even small details, like the aprons, the table settings, the baking, the ironing, they were lessons in self-effacement and how to be essential and unseen at the same time. My parents, in their own ways, reinforced this dynamic with subtle nods, half smiles, phrases like, "You have your talents," that disguised an entire blueprint for my life-supporting role. It wasn't cruelty in the overt sense. It was just the way things were. And for years, I accepted it, believed it, because what else could I do looking back now? It's wild how early the training began. I don't remember a single Christmas where I felt celebrated or seen. Victoria's achievements always dominated the room, her photos on the mantle, her friends laughing, her schedule dictating the flow. And me, I was there, orchestrating it all, a silent participant in someone else's highlight reel. I cooked, I cleaned, I polished. I set the stage, but I was never in the scene. Not really. And yet, somehow, I learned to perform with grace. There's a strange pride in that skill. I guess being capable, reliable, invisible but competent. It's a kind of survival mechanism, one that I would later realize had been honed over decades. But at the time, I just thought it was normal. Everyone's family has traditions, right? This was ours. The unseen work that went into making Victoria shine, that was just part of being Martha. The practical, responsible, invisible daughter. But somewhere deep down, even in those teenage years, the resentment began to simmer. The seed of understanding that maybe, just maybe, my labor had a cost that no one else would ever acknowledge. So, yeah, that's what Christmas was like in my family. A carefully staged event where the applause was reserved for Victoria, and I was the ghost behind the curtain. And honestly, that ghosting. It was a pattern that had been set long before I could protest. The chores, the baked goods, the perfectly aligned silverware, it was all part of a system that made me indispensable but never celebrated. And as I grew, that system only became more elaborate, more consuming, and increasingly hard to ignore. Okay, so picture this, it's December. Right. That time of year when the air is supposed to smell like pine and cinnamon, but for me, it just smelled like pressure. Pure pressure. And this year was different. Victoria had just announced she was bringing her fiancé, Julian, to Christmas. Julian, with his trust fund and allergy list a mile long. And yes, his parents were coming too. The stakes off the charts. The perfect Christmas they had been building for decades suddenly had a VIP guest list. And somehow, magically, all the weight of ensuring their fantasy fell squarely on me. It started slowly at first. The subtle nudges from my mom. You know, those gentle reminders that are really demands dressed up as care, Martha. Darling, I know you're busy with your computer thing, but we'll need you this weekend for some extra cleaning. And I'd sigh, rearrange my work schedule yet again. By the second weekend of December, it had escalated. The calls weren't reminders anymore. They were directives wrapped in passive-aggressive syrup. My father, Ewan, would just drop a list on the counter with that silent, commanding energy that made you feel like defying him was not an option. No words, just expectations etched in ink. And my mother would flit in, silk robe flowing, coffee in hand, offering little quips that somehow made you feel guilty for existing while doing everything for everyone else. So, there I was, Martha, the daughter who had been invisible her whole life, suddenly tasked with creating the most flawless Christmas in the history of the family. The chores weren't just chores this time, no, they were a gauntlet. Repainting guest bathrooms because mom thought the color was dreary. Designing a seating chart for the dinner to prevent social friction between Julian's notoriously opinionated dad and mine. Tracking down artisanal cheeses that required a 2-hour drive. And it wasn't like Victoria was slaving alongside me. She had her brand commitments, her curated content to create, her perfect Instagram life to maintain. I was the one running on fumes, caffeine, and resentment, turning their house into a palace while feeling smaller and smaller with every polished surface. The turning point, well, it was subtle at first, but then it hit me with the weight of a sledgehammer. Christmas Eve morning arrived, and I had been at their house since the 22nd, living in what had once been my childhood bedroom, now more like a storage space for Victoria's off-season wardrobe. I'd spent the previous 2 days in a blur of brining turkeys, prepping vegetables, baking pies, setting tables, arranging canapes. I was moving automatically, hands busy, mind numb. The smell of cinnamon and pine was no longer festive. It was suffocating. My holiday spirit, long extinguished. And then Dad walked in. Not a smile, not a hello, just a clipboard. I kid you not, a literal clipboard. On it, a typed sheet titled, in bold, Christmas Eve final preparations. House, dinner, gifts all broken down with meticulous precision, vacuum carpets. Set the dining table with the good crystal, light candles at precisely 4:30 p. Cook this, prep that, wrap these gifts with uniform bows. It wasn't a request. It was a work order, a declaration. I was staff, not family. And the realization slammed into me like a winter gust through a cracked window. All the warmth I'd tried to inject into the house, all the love I'd foolishly thought was part of my service, evaporated in that instant. I wasn't Martha the daughter. I was Martha the employee, and they were the boss. Then, Mom glided into the kitchen, silk robe flowing, coffee in hand, eyes flicking over the list. Then to me, no acknowledgement of my exhaustion, no concern for how I felt. Just don't screw this up, Martha. Victoria's guests, Julian's parents, they expect everything perfect. Big day for your sister. And that was it. A small, tinkling laugh and a reminder of my role. My chest tightened, and something inside me snapped, not explosively, but quietly, irrevocably. I looked at them both, my father already turning away. Duty done. My mother mentally drifting toward the perfectly decorated living room. They didn't even notice. They couldn't, and here I was, the invisible stagehand, quietly reaching the end of my rope. It was like the culmination of decades of being seen but not acknowledged, of working without applause, of sacrificing for someone else's glory. My resentment wasn't sudden. It had been simmering, slow, a pot just below boiling for years. And that morning, the lid finally rattled. Every demand, every casual dismissal, every unthanked effort, I felt them all converge into a single. Sharp clarity, I was done. Done being the invisible backbone, done being a human utility. The smile I forced onto my face wasn't compliance. It was liberation. And in that moment, I realized I was about to claim it. I moved through the motions. Of course, the canapes were arranged, covered, and tucked into the fridge. The turkey was prepped for the oven. The table was polished, Every surface sparkled. From the outside, yes, it was Martha being the dutiful daughter. Inside, though, it was a calculated performance, a Trojan horse. My mind, racing with suppressed fury and clarity, charted a new course. The why of it all became painfully, beautifully clear. This wasn't about one Christmas, it was about a lifetime of being second, of my labor, my energy, my self-sufficiency being exploited so that Victoria could shine. The pattern of invisible work, emotional neglect, and financial contribution to someone else's life wasn't subtle anymore. It was undeniable. And yeah, I thought back to all the tiny betrayals, the little inequities. 16, wanting a modest used car while Victoria got a brand new convertible. My scholarship money, painstakingly earned, funding her semester abroad in Florence. Every effort I'd made for independence had been quietly redirected to sustain her lifestyle. The culmination of it all, crystallized in the clipboard my father had handed me, felt like an invoice for decades of unpaid emotional and physical labor. And in that moment, I understood with complete, terrifying clarity the cost of Victoria's golden life had been my own invisibility. And here's the weird part. The anger wasn't just about them. It was about me, too. The years of swallowing resentment, of compliance, of convincing myself it was easier than fighting. That anger, that mix of hurt, betrayal, and exhaustion coalesced into something sharp and immediate, something that would demand action. I was no longer willing to exist in their world as a tool, as someone who simply enabled their fantasy. I wanted out. Not quietly, not with a whispered protest, but with intention, precision, and the satisfaction of reclaiming my own life. So yeah, that Christmas, the pressure wasn't just about chores or lists. It was the peak of a lifetime of erasure, of being invisible for the comfort and glory of another. And the burnout, the weight, the frustration, it all came to a head in that kitchen, with the smell of cinnamon and pine, a clipboard, and a mother's airy laugh that underscored my complete invisibility. That day, I realized I couldn't keep playing this role. Not just for Christmas, not just for Victoria, not for anyone. I had to reclaim myself. The emotional weight, the invisible labor, the relentless expectation of perfection, it all became the fuel for a decision that would change everything. After that Christmas morning, after the clipboard, the orders, the passive-aggressive comments, something inside me shifted. I wasn't just exhausted anymore, I was curious and furious. I realized I had lived my entire life in this family's background, a silent contributor to someone else's shining life, and I needed answers. I needed to see, in black and white, the cost of my invisibility, of my compliance, of my independence being exploited. And so, I started investigating. The first step was almost instinctive. Years of fetching things for Dad, opening files, getting forms, paying bills. It gave me a strange kind of access. I knew where the key to his office filing cabinet was hidden. Top left drawer of his desk, little wooden box, exactly where it had always been. My heart pounded as I slipped downstairs. The house was quiet. Everyone else was still upstairs, likely coordinating outfits or sipping coffee, oblivious to the storm about to unfold in their lives. The office door was unlocked. I moved in like a shadow, careful not to make a sound. My hands trembled as I opened the cabinet, sliding out the folders with a mix of anticipation and dread. Taxes, mortgage, insurance, investments, all neatly organized in Dad's meticulous handwriting. Then I found it, a folder simply labeled Victoria. Thick, fat, heavy with secrets. I sat at the desk, hands shaking slightly, and opened it. And wow, the evidence hit me harder than anything I could have imagined. Bank statements showing monthly transfers from my parents' savings into hers, labeled as living expense support. The amounts weren't small. Thousands every month, quietly vanishing from what should have been the family's shared wealth, my future inheritance, even retirement funds. There were mortgage documents for her condo. They hadn't just co-signed. They were paying over half of it every month. Credit card statements in her name. Luxury purchases, spa treatments, designer clothing, 5-star dinners all funded by my parents. The reality of it slammed me in the chest. Every achievement, every independence move I had made, every dollar I had saved had been siphoned into sustaining her life. My independence, it turns out, had been their resource. The low-maintenance daughter fueling the high-maintenance one. And there were contracts, invoices for her blog trips, sponsorships, travel arrangements. On paper, they looked like her glamorous influencer life. But the details showed the truth. She was frequently funded by my parents. Flights paid partially or entirely by them. Hotels, meals, excursions, all subsidized. It wasn't an investment in a business. It was financing a life of illusion, a life I had silently enabled for decades. And the sickest part, my parents didn't even see it as wrong. To them, it was fair, strategic. The logic was insidious. They praised me for self-sufficiency. I didn't need help. They reasoned, so we can pour our energy and resources into Victoria. I had been trained to take care of myself, so they could focus on her. My independence had been a tool, a justification, a convenient excuse to fund her fantasy. And suddenly, the anger was sharp, immediate. I had been a fool. My reliability, my competence, my self-sufficiency exploited. I started taking pictures of everything. Bank transfers, credit card statements, mortgage documents, invoices. Each photo a piece of evidence, each one a dagger cutting through decades of denial. I wanted to remember, to prove, to finally understand the scale of the inequity. Every document I photographed was another moment of clarity. My life had been redirected for someone else's benefit. My efforts, my time, my energy subsidizing the comfort, status, and fantasy of Victoria. I felt a strange mixture of horror, disbelief, and a grim satisfaction. Finally, the numbers matched my gut feelings. Finally, I had proof. As I dug deeper, the pattern was relentless. It went back years. My first apartment, my own savings. Her condo funded significantly by my parents. College scholarships I had earned, partially diverted to fund her extracurricular whims. Her semester abroad in Florence. Every financial contribution I thought was mine. Somehow, somewhere, it had also contributed to Victoria's life, and the emotional cost, the physical labor. Every holiday, every meal, every time I put her comfort ahead of my own, it all made sense now. The housework, the gift wrapping, the endless preparations had been a mere surface layer. Underneath was a systemic diversion of resources, of energy, of care to maintain her elevated status. I paused a few times, leaning back in the chair, staring at the stacks of documents, feeling the weight of years of being unseen and used. The anger was real, yes, but so was a strange sense of validation, Validation that my instincts, my feelings of being taken for granted, were not just emotional reactions, they were grounded in cold, hard facts. I had been a participant in this charade for decades, and now I could see the mechanics of it, laid bare. There was also something methodical about the way I approached it. This wasn't a tantrum, it was an investigation. I cross-referenced bank statements, traced funds, checked dates against major life events. Every withdrawal, every transfer told a story, and the story was consistent. Victoria's rise, her lifestyle, her image of effortless perfection, it had all been quietly subsidized by my parents. My own independence had been the engine that powered her life. They had built this entire system using me, my efforts, my energy, my savings, to fund their golden child. And for years, I had swallowed it, thought it was normal, thought it was love, thought it was just family. But it wasn't love, it was utility. And yet, there was a strange clarity in this realization. I wasn't imagining it. I wasn't being petty. It was all there, in the numbers, in the documents, in the undeniable evidence. My life had been quietly commandeered to support another's fantasies. And now, for the first time, I understood it fully. The invisibility, the labor, the endless compliance, it was all part of a long-term, systemic pattern that had been carefully maintained and enabled. My independence, which they praised as virtue, had been nothing more than a convenient tool to be leveraged against me. I thought back to every small injustice, every overlooked birthday, every ignored accomplishment, and saw them in a new light. The scholarships I earned, the promotions at work, the apartment I saved for each of these were quietly supporting someone else's comfort. And they had convinced themselves it was fair. They had framed my self-sufficiency as a moral good, as a sign of my practicality, when in reality, it had been a strategic choice on their part to free up resources for Victoria's extravagances. And the more I looked, the more precise the pattern became. Transfers coinciding with her blog trips, with luxury purchases, with milestones in her life. Mortgage payments aligned with vacations, expenses, luxury indulgences. Even the inheritance funds, meant to be split between us, were being quietly eroded, redirected to her lifestyle. It wasn't subtle anymore. It wasn't a gentle oversight. It was a decades-long meticulous orchestration. And me, I had been the invisible pillar holding it all together. The practical, competent, self-sufficient daughter who could be relied on to never complain, never question, never disrupt the illusion. And that's when the fury settled in, cold, precise, undeniable. I wasn't just hurt anymore. I was angry, not just at them, but at the situation, at the system, at the sheer audacity of how my life had been quietly siphoned away to maintain a fantasy. Every document I photographed, every number I recorded, became a weapon of truth. I wasn't going to let this be invisible anymore. I wasn't going to let the pattern continue unchallenged. My life, my labor, my energy, it was mine. And I was finally seeing the proof of how it had been exploited. It was surreal. Standing there in Dad's office, shuttering pictures on my phone, cataloging every line of text, every transfer, every invoice. The physical act of gathering evidence somehow made me feel empowered. It wasn't vengeance, not yet. It was recognition, validation, and the anger that came with it was sharp, but it also clarified what I needed to do next. The pattern was clear, the exploitation was undeniable, and the next step, well, the next step had to be about reclaiming my life, my autonomy, and finally, my voice. So, okay, here's where things get really intense. I'd spent hours, maybe days, gathering evidence, photos, documents, everything that showed just how deep this favoritism and exploitation went. And somewhere in that whirlwind, a thought planted itself in my brain, like a spark waiting for oxygen I could leave. Not just in my mind, not just in fleeting fantasy, but really leave. And that thought was terrifying and exhilarating all at once. I felt adrenaline buzzing under my skin, fear clawing at my chest, and yet an impossible, weightless kind of liberation that I hadn't felt in years. Packing felt strangely calm, methodical. It's weird, isn't it? You'd think my hands would be shaking uncontrollably, that I'd forget things, panic, freeze. But no. I moved through my childhood bedroom with a quiet focus, gathering the essentials. A few changes of clothes, toiletries, my laptop, the one connection to the life I'd built, and, ironically, the key to escaping the one I'd been trapped in. The duffel bag felt almost symbolic, like it held more than just clothes. It held years of frustration, quiet endurance, and finally, a plan for self-determination. I pushed aside boxes of Victoria's seasonal clothes, as if their presence were a physical obstacle I needed to step over on the way to freedom. And of course, while packing, my mind was racing a mile a minute. I imagined their reactions. Dad, with his clipboard, staring at a suddenly empty kitchen, the horror of his perfect plan crumbling. Mom, poised and pristine, finally realizing that I wasn't going to be there to enable her perfect Christmas. Victoria, mouth open, horrified, as her perfect evening started to implode, because the silent, competent pillar she relied on had just walked out, and I couldn't help a little smile at that thought. Tiny, but real. Not cruel. Really just satisfaction, the kind that comes from reclaiming your own life. Once the bag was packed, I pulled out my laptop. Scarlett and I had this code phrase for years, an inside joke. The Roman Empire is a go. Whenever I complained about my family, she'd say, "One day, you're going to pack a bag and go to Rome. Burn it all down, like Nero." And now, here I was, not in Rome yet, but on the precipice. I sent her a quick message. Code red, the Roman Empire is a go. Are you at your desk? Her reply came instantly. I was born at this desk. What do you need? I typed back, adrenaline fueling my fingers. First direct flight to Rome, leaving tonight or tomorrow morning. One way, nice hotel for a week. My treat, send me the bill. Her response, "Are you serious? Martha Deadly," I typed. "Yes, I'll tell you everything later. Just get me on a plane." And in that moment, the mix of terror and liberation hit me full force. My heart was pounding, my breath shallow, but I also felt free. My autonomy, which had been eroded for decades, was suddenly mine again. And it wasn't hypothetical. It was happening. I was acting. While Scarlett worked her magic, booking flights and hotels with practiced efficiency, I moved through the house, performing the motions I'd been trained to do for years. Arranging canapes, checking the turkey, straightening table settings. Every move was automatic, but my mind miles away. Plotting, strategizing, imagining their realization, savoring the first hint of the upheaval I was about to cause. I was Martha, dutiful daughter, On the surface, inside, I was a strategist, a rebel, a woman reclaiming the life that had been quietly siphoned from her for decades. Then came the resignation email. I opened a new document and began typing. Every word deliberate, controlled. I addressed my parents and Victoria directly. I referenced the clipboard, the list, the unspoken servitude that had defined my life. I have reviewed the tasks assigned to me for the perfect Christmas production in honor of Victoria and her guests. After careful consideration, I regret to inform you that I am resigning from my position as unpaid family servant, effective immediately. It was formal, detached, precise, and yet liberating, not yelling, not accusing, just stating facts, backed by evidence. I went through the financial evidence I had collected, laying it out systematically. Bank statements, mortgage payments, credit card bills, withdrawals from the investment account all attached as photos. No commentary needed. The evidence spoke for itself. I finished with a final act of defiance. The house was spotless. The food prepped, the gifts ready, but I wouldn't be there. The stage was set for a perfect Christmas. They just needed to find new staff. As for me, I was going to invest in myself because no one else in this family had. I saved the draft and turned my attention back to Scarlett. Her reply popped up almost instantly. You are all set. Flight to Rome leaves from the international airport at 11:30 p.m. Seat 12. A car will be at the end of your parents' street in 20 minutes. Hotel booked. It's beautiful. Are you really doing this? Yes, I typed back. Thank you. Scarlett, you have no idea what this means to me. Oh, I think I do, she replied. Go get your empire, girl. And suddenly, the surreal feeling of it all hit me. The duffel bag, the flight, the resignation email, it was real. I took one last look around my childhood room, absorbing the nostalgia without sadness. This wasn't just running away, it was reclaiming years of energy, of self-respect, of autonomy. I slung the bag over my shoulder, moved quietly through the house, down the back stairs, and slipped out the kitchen door into the cold December night. No one saw me leave, and I didn't look back. The ride to the airport was a blur. The quiet of the anonymous town car, the streetlights passing by, it all felt like a bomb. I was a spy in my own life, executing a carefully planned extraction, and the feeling of control was intoxicating. Every mile put more distance between the old Martha and the new one. The fear lingered, of course. What if they called? What if they found out? But that fear was balanced by an exhilarating sense of liberation, a sense that I had finally chosen myself. Not as a fleeting thought, but as a concrete action. The hours of compliance, of invisibility, of service, they weren't erased. But I had broken the chain. For the first time, I felt like the main character in my own story, not a stagehand in someone else's play. At the airport, checking in felt surreal. Families laughing, couples holding hands, all heading toward reunions and joy. And me, I was moving away from mine. An act of self-preservation disguised as a holiday escape. I kept my phone on airplane mode, refusing to peek at missed calls or potential texts. I wanted the separation, the disconnection, the chance to breathe without the weight of expectation pressing down on me. And I did. I let myself imagine, for a brief moment, the chaos I'd left behind, the panic, the frustration, the sudden realization of what they'd lost when the reliable daughter they depended on simply disappeared. And so, the adrenaline mixed with relief, the fear mixed with liberation. I was finally acting for myself, fueled by years of suppressed frustration and a newfound clarity. I wasn't running from my family, I was running toward my own life, my own freedom. Every step, every mile, every heartbeat felt like reclamation. The resignation email, the duffel bag, the flight, it was all part of a decisive, irreversible step. And for the first time in a very long time, I felt completely, profoundly, undeniably free. The flight to Rome was surreal. I settled into my seat, feeling the leather hug me in a way that was both comforting and oddly foreign. The plane hummed around me, passengers chatting, babies crying, luggage overhead, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I felt a kind of quiet liberation. No lists, no expectations, no hovering parents, no checklist of perfection I was supposed to uphold. Just me, the hum of the engine, and miles of air separating me from the chaos I had left behind. It was terrifying and thrilling all at once. I mean, the thought of what my family would think if they realized I was actually gone crept in for a second. But then I shoved it aside. I wasn't doing this for them. I was doing this for me. When we landed, the city was bathed in late afternoon light. Rome had this gentle chaos that felt alive in a way my meticulously ordered life at home never had. Streets curved in unexpected ways. Scooters weaved through traffic like a delicate dance, and every corner smelled like espresso and warm bread. I checked into the hotel Scarlett had booked, thank God for her, and stepped onto the balcony, letting the Roman air hit my face. It was crisp, slightly sweet, and utterly liberating. I took a deep breath and felt a kind of weight lift that I didn't even realize I'd been carrying for decades. The first few days were a mix of wandering and quiet reflection. I'd grab a cappuccino at some small cafe and sit outside, watching people rush by, noticing how vibrant and unpolished life could be. There was no list to check off, no schedule dictated by someone else's expectations. Just streets to explore, art to stumble upon, and myself to reconnect with. At first, there was a flicker of doubt. I'd wonder, was I selfish? Had I ruined Christmas? What would they say? But then I'd sip my coffee, take in the chatter around me, the clinking of cups, the warmth of the sun hitting the cobblestones, and feel a quiet empowerment settle over me. I was making choices solely for my joy. For the first time in decades, it felt like permission had been granted not by anyone else, but by myself. I visited the Pantheon, just wandering through, letting the history and grandeur of the place wash over me. It was humbling and invigorating at the same time. I thought about all the Christmases I had spent invisible, behind the scenes, and I felt a bittersweet clarity. Those experiences had shaped me, sure, but they hadn't defined me. Here, in this ancient city, with the sun glinting off marble and my own footsteps echoing in vast halls, I realized that reclaiming my life was possible. My liberation wasn't just an abstract concept, it was tangible. Each step on the cobblestones felt like a reclaiming of space that had always been mine, but never acknowledged. There were moments of pure joy, too. I bought a leather-bound journal. Just because no one would critique it or suggest it was impractical, I wrote in it, not about design work, not about deadlines, but about myself, my feelings, my reflections. I walked through piazzas, ducked into small shops, tasted gelato just because it looked good, and let myself linger without guilt. Each small decision, each tiny indulgence, reinforced this new sense of agency. I was living according to my desires, not someone else's scripted perfection. Of course. The family messages eventually started to filter in. Dozens of missed calls, texts, all the usual chaos. But with the phone tucked away, on airplane mode, they couldn't reach me, and I couldn't reach them. I allowed myself to feel the relief, the utter freedom, the way a deep breath can stretch into something almost physical, a kind of liberation you can feel in your bones. Watching the city come alive around me, smelling the rich espresso, feeling the sun, and tasting the vibrancy of life without obligation, it was intoxicating. Each street I wandered, each piazza I sat in, each tiny cafe I discovered was a testament to the life I was now actively choosing, rather than passively enduring. Even the moments of doubt became smaller, fleeting. I'd recall the lists, the clipboard, the perfectly polished surfaces at home, and I'd feel a brief pang of guilt. But it was quickly replaced by a stronger, steadier sense of resolve. I had acted, I had reclaimed, and nothing anyone could say from thousands of miles away could undo that. That clarity, that certainty, gave a different kind of energy, a sense of empowerment that vibrated through every step I took on these winding Roman streets. By the second day, I felt more at ease. I wandered through a small art gallery, lingered over frescoes, and felt the joy of discovery untainted by obligation. I stopped at tiny trattorias for lunch, choosing dishes for no reason other than my taste buds' whim. And it was a little revolutionary in itself. Even buying a simple pastry felt like reclaiming something I hadn't realized. I'd lost the right to make small, joyful choices without consequence. That was freedom in its purest form, and I soaked it up, letting it infiltrate every thought, every movement. Rome had a way of reminding me that life is bigger than any single Christmas, any single family expectation. The history, the art, the casual chaos, it all screamed at me to breathe, to exist for myself, to be seen and appreciated not for labor, but for being. I took long walks along the Tiber at dusk, letting the water carry away the tension that had been coiled in my shoulders for decades. I watched people laugh, gesture, live, and I let myself imagine a life where my decisions weren't dictated by someone else's fantasy. It was a profound, quiet revelation I could be Martha first, not the support system, not the invisible daughter, not the stagehand to Victoria's show. I treated myself to simple pleasures without justification. Cappuccinos at dawn, wandering streets without a map, journaling in little cafes, and letting the city guide me instead of lists. Expectations or passive-aggressive nudges. The weight of decades of labor, of invisibility, of compliance, it lifted slowly, like a fog dissipating. Each day, the empowerment grew, the fear shrank, and the joy of autonomy became more tangible. The thrill of being unaccountable to anyone but myself was addictive in the most healing way. I even laughed to myself at little things. Tiny moments I'd have never allowed in the old life. Watching a street performer toss juggling pins into the air. Buying a small leather trinket because it spoke to me. Lingering longer than necessary in a quiet piazza just to enjoy the light hitting the ancient stones. These weren't dramatic acts, they were tiny rebellions. gestures of self-prioritization I had been denied for decades. And with each one, my confidence swelled. A quiet, insistent pulse that reminded me, this life is mine, and I can shape it however I choose. The first Christmas away from home, walking past churches, cafes, and fountains, sipping espresso alone, I realized something profound. I wasn't running away from my family. I was running toward myself. The liberation I felt wasn't fleeting, it was a reclamation. A reassertion of agency that had been stolen from me in small increments over years. Rome, with all its history, chaos, and beauty, became the backdrop for a personal revolution. The first chapter in a life lived for me, by me. The city itself seemed to echo a message I hadn't heard in decades. You can exist for yourself, and it is enough. Returning from Rome was different. It wasn't a dramatic movie-style reunion. It was quiet, intentional, and deliberate. I knew I couldn't slip back into the old patterns, the invisible labor, the endless compliance, the constant sacrifice. I set the terms from the start. When I finally met my parents, it was on my turf, at a neutral coffee shop in my neighborhood. The energy was different, calm, controlled, mine. They looked tired, older, and there was a hesitancy in their posture that hadn't been there before. The frantic urgency, the unquestioned authority, they had been interrupted. And they knew it. We spoke carefully, almost awkwardly at first. My parents tried to justify their past actions, but the financial evidence I had collected was undeniable. Dad, the man of numbers and logic, couldn't argue against the statements in front of him. Mom, emotional and persuasive, had fewer tools when faced with facts. And that was the moment I realized the power dynamics had shifted. I wasn't just the dutiful, invisible daughter anymore. I was a person with boundaries, with agency, and I intended to keep it that way. The conversations weren't perfect, and nothing changed overnight. Victoria wasn't included in these discussions, which, in a small way, acknowledged that the issues were structural, not personal between sisters. Therapy began for my parents. Financial boundaries were enforced with Victoria, and slowly, cautiously, they started to understand the consequences of their favoritism. And me, I prioritized myself first. I decided when and how to interact, what was acceptable and what wasn't. I rebuilt relationships on my terms, gradually and intentionally. It was empowering, in a quiet, steady way. Christmas, which had always been a minefield of obligation and invisible labor, became mine to define. I started traveling sometimes with Scarlett, sometimes alone. Paris, Kyoto, Buenos Aires. Each holiday was a chance to reconnect with myself, to create traditions that didn't involve lists, perfection, or sacrifice for someone else. I drank cappuccinos without guilt, wandered streets without agenda, and allowed myself to exist purely for joy and discovery. These small acts felt revolutionary. I learned to cherish time, space, and the freedom to make choices that nourished me, even with family. The tone changed. I engaged on my own terms, politely but firmly. The relationship with Victoria is distant but civil. The bond of sisterhood has been altered by the experiences we shared, the boundaries I enforced, and the lessons learned, but it's honest now. And honesty, I realized, is more valuable than the illusion of perfection or the cost of invisible labor. My parents, too, are learning. slowly, carefully. They are learning to respect my autonomy and my need for boundaries. It's a process, not a one-time fix. But progress is progress. The biggest change, though, is in me. I recognize my own worth without needing external validation, without being defined by tasks I perform for others. I understand the difference between care and exploitation, between generosity and entitlement. I have the freedom to say no, to set limits, to choose experiences that nurture my spirit rather than drain it. And that freedom, that choice, is the gift I give myself every holiday now, every Christmas, every moment of self-directed joy. Reminds me that being the main character in my own life is not just possible, it's essential. So, that's where I am today, navigating the delicate balance of family, independence, and personal growth. Christmas isn't about performing, about pleasing others, or about disappearing into someone else's spotlight. It's about reclaiming time, honoring my own needs, and building a life that reflects who I am, not who I was expected to serve. And honestly, that feels better than any holiday I've ever experienced. It feels like freedom. And sometimes, freedom is the best gift you can ever give yourself. Wow. So that's my story, finally. Stepping out of the shadows and claiming my own space, my own choices. It's wild how liberating it feels to prioritize yourself and set boundaries. If this story resonated with you, or even just sparked a thought about personal freedom, stick around for more. And hey, if you want to follow along on stories like this, hit like and subscribe. I promise. It's all about learning to live life on your own terms and maybe finding a little inspiration along the way.